Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. Today, we are joined by Katy Schmid, Senior Director of National Program Initiatives at the ARC. So, Katy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'm really excited to talk about the partnership between the ARC and Amazon. And I've been waiting to talk about it, honestly. I'm really excited to hear how it's going. But before we even get into all of that, just for some of our listeners who may not have as much familiarity with what the ARC does, would you be able to share a little bit about the organization with us?
Sure, I'm happy to share a little more about the work that we do at the ARC. So, the ARC is one of the oldest and largest nonprofits focused on supporting folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And we actually are grassroots based. We were started by parents that were around a kitchen table in the 50s saying we want more for our children who are being told by their physicians at the time to be institutionalized. So we have a long, deep, and rich history in the disability space. Currently, we have nearly 600 chapters throughout the country, and they all offer different levels of support and programming. So we like to say you've seen one chapter of the ARC means that you've seen one chapter of the ARC. They all sort of take different shapes and sizes, but generally the main theme and what they do is support families and people with intellectual disabilities across various parts of their lifespan for the arc of their life from birth to grave.
And I have a little bit of experience with my chapter, I should say. When I was teaching special ed, I was close to the Sussex County ARC chapter. We did a lot of work with them when I was teaching.
Just in New Jersey. I was there for a couple weeks, and I was really excited to drive past and see the ARC of Ocean County. So shout out to all of my New Jersey chapters. My husband's from New Jersey, and we spend time in LBI, and I was just exciting to be able to see the local presence there.
That is awesome. I know there's a lot of great work being done. I'm biased, of course, to New Jersey.
Yeah.
That's where I am, but I know all over there's a lot of amazing work being done. But I want to talk specifically about the ARC and Amazon partnership that's happening. So, what is it, and what it was the inspiration behind this kind of development for it?
Yeah, so we are really excited to have Amazon as a partner. We actually started our work with Amazon in 2022, I believe. We got conversations moving in 2022 and then started sort of like a small pilot with them in 2023 where we were seeing what it would look like to put various Amazon devices into the hands of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at our chapters. And so we partnered with a couple chapters in our network and worked with them to establish who would be good candidates to use the devices, and then also do some pre-assessments and post-assessments to try to measure knowledge gains. So that was sort of how we dipped our toes in the water with this larger partnership, was just seeing where there might be some synergy to make this bigger. So bring us to the beginning of 2024, and we had put all of our ducks in a row, so to speak, with Amazon to launch the larger device program that we're here to talk about today, which is disseminating 5,000 free devices throughout the country to all of our chapters. So we really, after assessing the results of the work done in 2023, saw that there was a demand there. There were several use cases there that could really, really benefit folks with IDD and their families. So that has brought us to present day, where we have since actually disseminated all 5,000 devices. So we were able to already get through that entire inventory. We launched that in December, and we got through the inventory in June. So that was really exciting for us to be able to report back to Amazon that the demand is there and that folks in our network are really hungry to use this technology.
That is amazing that everything was already disseminated from that first inventory. And I know firsthand, just that's my research area, was technology and disability. So I can just imagine how in demand those devices would be for everybody and how beneficial they
Absolutely.
would be as well.
Absolutely. We were really, really excited. I too actually have a background in special education and technology. So I knew prior to ever even coming to the ARC and joining their team 8.5 years ago, the impact that technology can truly have on the independence of somebody with a disability, opening more opportunities, whether it be for school, job, just independent living in general. So when this partnership started to develop, I felt like the opportunities are endless here, truly, and we're just scratching the surface with them. And we're hopeful to see what might come next year and future years, when looking at technologies that are currently being developed and how they might be able to benefit people with disabilities.
Oh yeah, definitely. The possibilities, it is endless. There's so many options. And so I want to dive into that a little bit, right? 'Cause you said how it could impact, employment and just daily living and communication and things like that. How are you seeing or how are you envisioning these donated devices making an impact on people's lives? What have you noticed so far?
Probably going to be an obvious one to most, but building upon independence, right? Just how you or I might be using our Amazon devices. I have Echoes all over my house, and I'm sort of able to build out this smart home style system. And so, just like we might be able to use it, they're able to use it, but the impact is so much greater because they're able to build on that independent component of their life that they may have otherwise been relying on either caregivers or family members. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Another thing that we're seeing when we're asking for feedback from our participants is that they're also using it, again, just like you or I, for entertainment purposes, right? Listening to music, finding joy in the use of technology in the same way that we use it. Music, games, jokes, even connecting with family members. So, you know, I'd like to have some sort of really grandiose use that we've uncovered at this point. And sure, there are definitely unique uses that we're coming across, but most of what we're seeing is that they're able to use these devices and they're using it the same way we are, but the impact for their lives is much greater.
I'm glad you mentioned the entertainment piece because I feel like even when thinking about like impact of technology, the default answer is always to jump to like day to day living, but we forget about that importance of the
Right.
entertainment piece.
Why can't we all just enjoy entertainment being a part of something that's really, really valued for folks with disabilities too? And I even saw that when I was in the school systems. It was like, well, this device is meant for communication or better executive functioning skills. It really shouldn't be for the entertainment piece. And yes, there could be arguments made that it should serve one purpose, but also why can't we find value in using it for both?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially with these devices that, like you said, we're already using. Everybody's kind of using them already. Their Alexa or a tablet or whatever the device is. So to have it do both things, it just makes it easier. You have the entertainment and you have the daily living needs all in one singular location for you to use.
Absolutely. I will mention one case that is, I don't know if I'd call it unique, but I'd call it interesting, is that we did hear from a parent whose young adult son was living with them, and they set up a system so that the young adult son didn't have to get up every single time they wanted to reach out to family members. And they were able to use those devices, again, to sort of make a smart home within their house, much less expensive than some of the smart homes that were maybe being put together 5, 10 years ago, and utilize that for a communication purpose that also parlayed into more independence and whatnot. So I anticipate that as we near the end of this year, we're going to be hearing a lot more on cases similar to that are maybe a little more unique in how our users have leveraged the technology.
Oh, that's really awesome. There's so many ways that it could be used. So it's great that those are starting to pop up here and there, like those innovative approaches to how to use those devices. Was there a specific process that you used for disseminating those devices to everybody? Like, what was I guess it was the decision process for how to take those 5,000 devices and give them out to different chapters?
That was a big part of the planning. When you have 600 chapters all throughout the country, different shapes and sizes, and then also 5,000 devices, we thought, oh gosh, how are we going to actually make this happen? So, this is where TechSoup came into play. And TechSoup, if you're not familiar with them, they are also a nonprofit and they procure devices to other nonprofits, not just in the disability space, but across the country, serving whatever purpose that particular nonprofit might be needing technology for. So they sort of served as our middle player in all of this, where we set up an internal website that allowed for our chapters to go in, put their information, and then place orders. Initially, we wanted to ensure that we had a good checks and balances system so that not everybody could just go in, or if somebody received a rogue email that was not a part of the chapter network, they could not access this. So we put a lot of safeguards in place to ensure that that couldn't happen. We also wanted to make sure that, a larger chapter wasn't going to go in and maybe make an order for 1,000 devices, right? So we really had to be careful with how we designed this so that it was equitable across our chapter network, while also ensuring that, those larger chapters, maybe at some point, if we had extra, they could receive those extra devices. So we started off having a minimum number of orders so that we weren't just having a chapter order one device. They were ordering them in small packages. I believe that we were doing bundles of 25 so that it made more sense, as far as placing orders and shipping. So it didn't get too unwieldy, right? So a minimum order of 25, and then there's a maximum order. And then towards the end of our inventory starting to run out, we lifted all of that so that the chapters that still were hungry for more were able to go in and get more if they wanted. That was what the system was, is thank goodness for TechSoup being there to really help with that logistical component, because I can't imagine being able to do that just as me with some of the other programs that I have to run simultaneously. Amazon also had a heavy hand in ensuring that all of the orders were going through TechSoup properly. So there was a team of 3 of us, tight knit between TechSoup, Amazon, and myself, to ensure that things were running smoothly. And we had periodic check-ins to make sure of that.
I like that you kind of opened it up to everybody. I know that just from working with smaller organizations versus larger, it's easy for a larger organization to come in and like usually either get hand selected because they're larger, and then the smaller ones kind of get forgotten about. So I like that you made it an equal opportunity for any chapter that wanted to get involved.
Absolutely. And that's a fair point. There's lots of programs that we run where we might partner directly with a specific number of chapters, and they might serve as like a sub-grantee for a larger program that I might run. And in this case, that was not going to make sense for us. We needed to make sure that every chapter in our network who's supporting people with disabilities in their community had access to this program, and that it wasn't just limited to certain geographic areas or certain size chapters, or even chapters that maybe had specifically trained staff on this. We wanted everybody to have a shot. After ensuring we did lots of email campaigns internally and some external facing, just to make sure there was awareness out there, we felt strongly that the folks that were interested were able to put in that order. And we've continued to keep in touch with those folks as we're moving through this program.
You had mentioned having a specific staff member, or not needing to have a specific staff member who is trained in the devices. How did the training look? That's my current job, is do technology training, so I know how difficult it is to get everyone trained in a timely and equitable way. So how did that look for the users who were using it or the staff members who were supporting them?
We tried to do it in the most sustainable way possible. So we worked with Amazon to create some guides that were in pretty simple language format with visuals, so that along with the devices, that those guides were being offered to the chapters to support the folks in their community. In a perfect world, we'd be able to sit and do a training with every single chapter that order these devices and every single user. But that was something that is so unique to the chapter that's supporting the person and their specific needs, that we did sort of leave it in the hands of the chapters to determine the level of training that's needed, because some of these users might be working with their family members to implement. Some of these users might be working with a chapter staff member. Some of these users might be just receiving the device and using it independently. So we really tried to make sure that we were taking that into consideration. And I think that as we continue to hear back from chapters, that will really also help inform how we approach that later this year and into future years as we do device dissemination at this scale.
That makes sense. I think having, and I see that from my own experience too, leaving it into the hands of the people who are going to be using it, but having those like overarching, like, this is what it looks like guides, but then letting people decide what works best for them. That makes sense that that's the best approach that to take.
Yeah. I will say that we did try to point out to within the guide that there are additional apps that can be added to these devices that might address specific accessibility needs for speech and things like that. And we also partner in a separate program with several chapters on technology coaching. So we did also ensure that those chapters that are already have a longstanding partnership with us for a separate funder, we're aware of this program. We're ordering as many devices as possible so they could leverage these devices to also use that with their tech coaching, because they are those trained trainers that are the folks that are pioneering those sort of programs where they're providing that tech coaching.
Oh, that's awesome. I could see even people who are very tech savvy, those accessibility features differ so much from platform to platform. Like, I'll
They
be
do.
honest, I don't know where I'd find them
Yeah.
on an Amazon like tablet or anything. So that's a good point.
Yes, yes. And it changes so
Yes.
rapidly. I'm always all for embedded accessibility features. And there are some tech giants out there that have done a really good job of always having things embedded. But then other tech companies, it's, more, you have to download those app features. So it runs the gamut, but we definitely try to give as much information on what might be available to folks to address those accessibility needs.
We talked a little bit about the improvement of day to day life and routines. How overall do you see these devices contributing to the creation of a more inclusive and accessible society overall?
It goes back to universal design, right? And a lot of the things that we're seeing, even in the AI space, it's reminiscent of technology that has existed for a long time to support people with disabilities. So I could go on and get into many debates around AI and universal design, but I do see that a lot of the things that are existing in the Amazon devices and other devices that are being put out there are items that were already being used, or types of technology that were already being used by the disability community. And now we're seeing it sort of spread and become much bigger. Universal design is the theory behind it, is meant to support any user. I see that trend continuing, where we're going to continue to see components of technologies that have always been supported the disability community extracted into these bigger movements in the technology field. To boil it down a little further to the Amazon space, I think that we see that the devices that we provided this year, which were the Show and then the Fire tablet, there's definitely continued demand for that. But we are curious to see where we might be able to explore some of the other Amazon devices. I'm not going to, make guarantees, but we've talked about the Ring device, for example, for independent living and security. So we're trying to gear up for the next iteration of this thing. And we don't want to leave any stone unturned when it comes to exploring how technologies might be able to really make a bigger impact for the folks in the disability community. So as much as the tablet's great, the show's great, we're trying not to just solely focus on that. We are considering what else might be out there in the Amazon tech portfolio.
That's exciting. And also I mean, our listeners can't see, but I was like nodding profusely during that part because the point about things existing in the tech space for the disability community being brought into like more of the general population. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm always talking about that in my role. Like the AI fear that keeps coming up and the machine learning fear. I'm like, this has been a thing. I don't know where you've been, but this has been a thing for a very long time.
I
And it's
not
just
new.
it's amazing how many things keep coming into more commonplace devices. So I'd be excited to see, especially with things like the Ring in the future and things like that, as more devices keep popping up, how they can be utilized in a better way while still taking from some of the assistive tech features that other more, complicated devices have had in the past.
Totally. And to take it a step further, I mentioned the whole like sort of pseudo smart home. I mean, throw a Ring into that mix too. So you're adding security, you're adding smart home features, independent living. So there's endless possibilities. If there's a will, there's a way, sort of thing here. And if there's the right support, which I will always draw
Yes.
back on when we're talking about disability, if there's the right support in place, consistency, and all of that, we are really excited where we might be able to take this.
That is awesome. And I always go back to from the teacher perspective, it was just so great to have my students using the same devices as everybody else. So I love that it's the same device that everybody's using, just an innovative approach to help their individual needs better.
1,000%. I was always a proponent of ensuring that whatever the communication style for the student or device for the student was appropriate, obviously you want to do that. But, if we can get a tablet or a phone or something that looks like everybody else into their hands, and again, it makes sense. It's still supporting their accessibility needs. Then let's do that versus giving them a big bulky thing. Sure, there are folks that is the device that's right for them, but I also see a space where let's not default to something. If we can make it more streamlined, let's do that. And it will also include all the other accessibility features and programs and entertainment features that some of the other more outdated devices might not have.
Exactly, exactly. That's a great point because I mean, I know personally I can't handle having more than a couple of devices on me at a time. I can't imagine having to have one device for entertainment, one for communication, unless that's something that somebody needs or wants. You're right,
Right,
but
right.
yeah.
It's all individualized. I fully acknowledge that it really depends on the person's needs. But if there's a space for something to sort of provide all of the components, just like you or I have on our cell phones to get through the day, then like, why wouldn't we just do that?
Makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Leading into that, so for the individuals who have received the devices, are working with them right now, is there any opportunity for them to share recommendations or suggestions to, in this case, Amazon, to talk about, I know as users test things out in different ways, there's opportunities for companies to make revisions based on request. Is there something like that that's happening with this partnership now?
Yes. So a part of our partnership is that we open the opportunity to do user testing, basically saying if Amazon wants for us to provide that feedback or do a more formal exercise of user testing, that we are eager to do that. We've done that with other large tech companies, and we are always excited to inform a tech developer on where we can poke holes in what they've developed and make sure everything's accessible, right? I will say that right now we're sort of in the stage with Amazon where we're trying to get really early feedback from users on how it's going with the devices, and then also what they're feeling would be great moving into year 2. I think that we're probably going to be asking the questions that you're referring to around like where could we change things? I think that might be a question towards the end of the year because I think we do want to let our users get their feet a little more wet, but that is something that is fully on our radar. It's a part of our partnership with Amazon is to get that feedback and better understand like what went great, what didn't go so great, where could there be changes made.
That's perfect, and it makes sense to have to wait a little bit longer toward the end till you get more immersed in the technology and things like that to really figure out where those areas are that you'd wanna see changed, but that's great that that line of communication is open because I feel like so often with tech companies, like, they just don't know what they don't know, and, especially, even coming from the ed tech side, there's been times that I've said to companies like, "This isn't working for my students. They'd like to see it this way," and they didn't even think about doing it that way, so that's great that that line of communication is open.
Absolutely. I fully co-sign on that. I think that oftentimes, some tech companies, you don't know what you don't know, but accessibility it feels like we're finally getting a little more traction in that space and that is starting to bubble up a bit more. I will say something that I say often around accessibility. I do find that there's a lot of attention that's given to sensory and ambulatory disabilities when it comes to accessibility. There's not much given to cognitive disabilities. And so when it comes to ensuring there's accessibility with cognitive disabilities, that is not something that is as in the forefront as it needs to be. And so that is the voice that I try as much as possible on some of the boards and committees that I sit on to say, hey, all of, the speech recognition's great, all of this speech to text, those things are great. We want those. But what else are we missing here? Where can we make things more simplified at the touch of a button? And where could there be more images if I need to see more images? And those are just a couple of examples. So that's something that with our stakeholders for the ARC, I think we're uniquely positioned to be able to help address those problems for tech companies.
And that is something that they're really missing. I feel like I go into meetings and it's always, "Here's the text to speech, here's the speech to text, here's the word prediction," and it's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, those are the obvious ones, and they're
Yeah.
great, are awesome, but, like, what else you got for me?"
Yeah, yeah. What about all of the other students, that are not necessarily needing those features, but need other features in order to access the information?
Yep. I mean, it's great that they're looking at accessibility, but it's a good starting point, but it's great that communication is open with the ARC because I think you're right, that is an opportunity for them to make improvements in the cognitive space as opposed to just kind of, I don't want to say the traditional accommodations, but the more prevalent accommodations,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess.
More obvious, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the press release I read, this partnership can help to close the digital divide. So, how do you see this initiative working to close that divide for individuals with IDD or just increasing inclusion within society overall?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we need to continue to work on getting internet into all households. And this program is not going to necessarily address that. I've worked on other programs through the government programs that were addressing it and it's no longer, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But I think that having the same systems that, maybe a high income household might have that have smart technologies, this is a step closer to be able to provide those technologies in a similar way for free, right? In an accessible format. So a large majority of the folks with IDD that are living independently are living below the social economic line, status line. And so being able to provide these devices for free is huge. And the hope is being able to also demonstrate that these devices are making an impact in their lives might be able to make the case for even more technologies that they can get, whether it be through us or through Medicaid or Medicare. So that's the first sort of thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about how we're going to close that gap. And again, I go back to the notion of, if I'm using a technology that has sort of been spun off of universal design and was developed for folks with disabilities, then those devices should be in the hands of people with disabilities, right?
Yes.
When I think about closing the gap, it's multi-pronged. Of course, internet's a huge component that's a part of that, I hope will continue to be examined and addressed. But being able to make access to these devices more equitable is something that we will continue to fight for.
And it's great that those steps are being taken. I know there's obviously a long way to go, but I mean, especially in terms of, I mean, I can do a whole episode on the piece about the necessity of the internet for everybody.
Right. Like, how does the United States not have internet in every home right now? And we're working on it, but it's wild to me sometimes to think about all of the technologies that exist out there that are so over the top. But like this is pretty fundamental thing that we should be able to have. It should be a right.
Yes, everybody needs to have that foundational piece because, I mean, at this point, what can't we do without the internet? Like, it's just,
And what
it's
can you do without the internet? Yeah.
yes. I think that that's a great point. We know from research and experience that these devices are so beneficial for people's lives, but having that proof through this initiative has to be really helpful as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how do you see this initiative evolving in the future? I know we talked a little bit about kind of your hopes beyond this year, toward the end of this year of the program, but what are you hoping more in the long term for this partnership?
Yeah, we talked about the user testing. I think that would be something I would love for us to solidify. I think the ball is in Amazon's court. Obviously, they're the ones with the technology. We're the ones with the community. So we'll wait to see where we go with that. And I think that will come, and it's just going to be a matter of when the timing is right for them. And like I mentioned, we're really looking closely right now at what are the current devices doing for our folks? What's the hunger for our folks with the devices that we've provided this year? Where might there be the devices that we could interconnect or maybe just do a more concerted approach with one chapter that wants to pilot maybe a program that we are a little more hands-on in designing, right? This particular program this year was designed to be pretty free for our chapters to use, right? That we provide guidance saying these devices are for people with IDD that your chapter supports or within your community that you decide to work with. But I could see a world where we are a little more intentional, and that's not meant to be saying that we're not intentional this year, but really just designing a program that we're hands-on, we're looking really closely at how these devices are interacting. We're choosing maybe a building that a chapter supports, with people with IDD and seeing how those devices play into their day-to-day. So I could see us going in two different directions where we're still maintaining that sort of free-flowing program, but then also taking that approach where we're having a close eye, almost like a case study, to draw up a white paper afterwards and talk about the results of that. So I can't make guarantees, but I anticipate that those are some of the things we'll be talking about as we develop out our next year.
That makes sense to have the like, almost like the two-pronged approach to it with the broader just access and being
Yep.
able to use freely, and then also having the more controlled study. Because I could see that being beneficial to have that to still have and give chapters the opportunity to use it at their own discretion, but then
Right.
also having that more controlled approach that you could say, look what we did and look how this works," so that more people could also replicate that too. I could It's really interesting how many different, paths this initiative can take from the user testing to that piece. There's a lot going on.
Another thing that we talked about is figuring out how we might be able to have folks from Amazon who serve as trainers for some of these devices actually go out to some of the chapters if we're partnering with them. So I anticipate a bit of a hands-on in-person approach that might be bubbling up. And I agree. I think that it's always wise to take into consideration there are going to be chapters that still need access to these devices and programs, but maybe it can be more free flowing while we also have a little more of a controlled program happening.
Having that in-person pop-in would be cool too, because I know, like, I've distributed devices even just to classrooms, and until I go in there and see the students using them, like, I have an idea for how they're being used, but actually seeing someone use it on a day-to-day basis really helps to offer a new perspective, so that'd be really cool.
And another thing that we've talked about with Amazon is figuring out how we can tell the stories of the users in a way that it makes sense for any layperson audience. You see some of the commercials that are put out by tech companies that highlight that they've started thinking about accessibility. And I think that we are positioned with this partnership to certainly leverage a story that could be a commercial, that could really show that it's not just, your Echo that's sitting there that's taking your shopping list or your music, but it's impacting people well beyond what you even imagine, especially for folks that, aren't as familiar with disability and understanding how important technology is. So I feel like the stories are going to be a huge piece, and that's still to be seen with Amazon, where we go with it. But right now I'm excited that we now have 5,000 devices out there to work with those users.
Yeah, it's the good starting off point that could eventually lead to more. I would love to see that because, like, there's so much power in those authentic stories. And I've seen some of the commercials from the tech giants out there with their
Oh, yeah,
accessibility. And I've sat with people who don't have as much disability experience, and they're like, wow, I didn't know like this could
totally.
do that. And it's great for them to see like this is how somebody else is using that same exact device they have in their pocket in their day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it assists with the normalization of disability and the elimination of ableism the more that we have folks with disabilities out there. So that, it's even bigger than just the tech piece.
Exactly. Yeah, having those real authentic narratives is probably the most impactful piece of the entire thing, and having people be able to tell their own stories and their own experiences, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Katie, for being here with us today, for talking to us all about the start of the Amazon partnership with the ARC and all of the work being done and that's going to be done. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
It was my absolute pleasure. It's been such a lovely conversation. You and I have a lot of similarities in our background. So I've really, really enjoyed being a guest here and just having the opportunity to chat with you today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.